I bought that cabin for quiet. Not the cute, stage kind people post online with a steaming mug and a pastel sunrise. I'm talking about real quiet. The kind so complete it makes your ears hum at night because there's literally nothing else filling the space. No traffic rolling by. No neighbors shouting through thin walls. No lawnmowers howling at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. The cabin sat high along the Blue Pine Ridge, tucked behind a stretch of forest most people wouldn't even know how to reach unless they already lived up there. Or unless, like me, they'd spent a long time intentionally searching for a place that felt forgotten. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't big. It wasn't built to impress anyone. It was built to vanish. And for years, that's exactly what it did. Weekend, holidays, sometimes entire months where it just waited for me, untouched, unchanged, doing exactly what a cabin is supposed to do, mind its own business. No problems, no drama, no surprises, until the letter arrived. It came in a thin white envelope, HOA logo stamped neatly in the corner, like it was proud of itself. I almost didn't open it because when you own property long enough, you learn a simple truth. Nothing good ever comes in an HOA envelope. Inside was a single page, printed, formal, and overly confident. It explained, using a lot of words, that my cabin had been reassigned. Reassigned. Apparently, according to the letter, my property qualified as underutilized, and under a specific clause, one I had never heard of and never signed, and had absolutely never agreed to, the HOA board had the authority to temporarily allocate and use structures for community benefit. Community benefit, in this case, meant the HOA president's son needed somewhere to live. Her name was Marjorie Blake. Everyone called her Mrs. Blake, at least to her face. Behind her back, the names were much less polite. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the HOA. She'd held the position so long people forgot elections were even supposed to happen. She had a reputation. Letters for fences an inch too tall. Fines for trash cans visible longer than 6 hours. Warnings about the color temperature of porch lights. She didn't just enforce rules. She curated fear. And now, apparently, she curated herself a free cabin. I laughed out loud in my kitchen, holding the letter like it was an unfinished joke. There was no universe where this was real. No universe where an HOA could just give away property, especially not mine. But the laugh faded when I saw the bottom of the page. A deadline. 7 days. 7 days for voluntary compliance. 7 days before enforcement actions would begin. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I didn't email. I figured ignoring nonsense was the adult move. Turns out nonsense hates being ignored. The following Saturday, I drove up to the cabin. Same winding road. Same trees leaning in like they were listening. Same weight lifting off my shoulders the closer I got, until I saw the moving truck, bright white, bold lettering, parked directly in front of my driveway, engine still running, and standing beside it, clipboard hugged to her chest like a shield, was Mrs. Blake herself. She looked exactly how you'd expect. Perfect posture, pressed blazer, hair sprayed into obedience, smile sharp enough to cut paper. Behind her stood a younger guy, mid-20s maybe, leaning against the truck, scrolling on his phone like this was just another errand he didn't want to be doing. I parked, stepped out, and took my time closing the door. Morning, I said, calm, polite, curious. She turned, scanned me, and smiled wider. You're late. That was my first real clue. She wasn't surprised to see me. She'd planned on this. Late for what? I asked. She tapped the clipboard. The transition. I sent you a letter. Oh, I got the letter, I said, nodding. I just assumed it was a mistake. Her smile didn't shift. It wasn't. She gestured toward the cabin behind me. This property now falls under HOA allocation. My son will be taking occupancy effective immediately. I looked at the truck, looked at the kid, looked back at her. You're standing on my land, I said. She shook her head slowly. The kind of shake meant to feel educational. No, you're standing on HOA-managed property. And according to our bylaws, any interference with a board-approved reassignment constitutes trespassing. There was that word again. Trespassing. She straightened, her voice getting louder and firmer, like she was already performing for an invisible audience. I suggest you step aside so my son can move in without further complications. I tilted my head, not because I was confused, but because I was genuinely impressed by how confident she was. The kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged. Mrs. Blake, I said, you might want to slow down. She leaned closer. I don't take legal advice from non-residents. That's when I smiled. Not big, not smug, just enough to signal that something had shifted. You should, I said quietly, because this cabin doesn't belong to the HOA. Her eyes narrowed. All properties within Blue Pine Ridge fall under HOA jurisdiction. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the familiar weight. Not this one, I said, pulling it out. The badge caught the light before she fully understood what she was seeing. Her smile cracked just a little, and that's where everything changed. Pause the story here, because this is the moment where things stop being absurd HOA drama and start becoming something far more instructive. By standard procedure, a homeowners association does have authority, but that authority is narrow, dull, and very specific. HOAs regulate use, not ownership. They can fine you over paint colors. They can argue about landscaping. They can make your life miserable in 1,000 petty ways. But they cannot seize property, transfer ownership, or reassign a home because they feel like it, no matter how official the letterhead looks. From a legal standpoint, what Mrs. Blake was doing followed a classic pattern of overreach. She relied on vague wording, obscure clauses, and the assumption that most people won't push back. HOAs survive on compliance through confusion. If something sounds official enough, people freeze. They don't ask questions, and they don't call anyone who actually knows better. And then there's a psychological layer, because this was a psychological trap. Authority figures like her depend on intimidation wrapped in routine. She'd spent years conditioning neighbors to comply without resistance. So in her mind, this wasn't theft. It was entitlement. Her son needed a place. She had power. Therefore, the situation solved itself. What she didn't account for was jurisdiction. Federal, state, private, those lines matter. And when you cross them without realizing it, you don't just lose an argument. You invite consequences you can't HOA your way out of. The takeaway is simple. Confidence without competence is dangerous. And when someone turns rules into weapons without understanding where those rules end, the fallout is usually fast, humiliating, and very public. Now, back to the driveway. The second that badge caught the light, the atmosphere changed. Not dramatically. No swelling music, no bird scattering, but in that subtle, uncomfortable way where everyone involved realizes a script they memorized no longer applies. Mrs. Blake stared at it, then at my face, then back at the badge again, like she was hoping it might blink and turn into something harmless if she waited long enough. That's unnecessary, she said finally. Her voice was thinner now, sharper around the edges. This is a civil matter. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer either. I just let the silence stretch, because silence has a way of making people talk. Actually, I said, this stopped being civil the moment you authorize someone to occupy property you don't own. Her son finally looked up from his phone. Mom, what's going on? She waved him off without turning around. Adults are talking. I slipped the badge back into my pocket slowly, deliberately, like time wasn't an issue, because it wasn't. This cabin, I said, gesturing behind me, is not governed by your HOA in the way you think it is. It hasn't been since the day I acquired it. Her lips pressed together. That's impossible. No, I said, it's inconvenient. She straightened again, reaching for that familiar posture, the one that had worked for years. You can't just flash a badge and intimidate board members. I'm not threatening you, I said calmly but firmly. I'm explaining, and you should listen. She didn't interrupt this time. This property was purchased under federal authority for restricted use. It's registered accordingly, which means I paused, letting the words settle. You just attempted to occupy federal property without authorization. The color drained from her face. So fast, it was almost impressive. That's not, she started, stopped, swallowed, and tried again. I wasn't informed. That's not how jurisdiction works, I said. You don't need to be informed to be wrong. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her grip. She adjusted it. A nervous reflex. I was acting in good faith, she said, and for the first time, the confidence was gone. The bylaws don't apply here, I said. They never did. Her son shifted his weight. Mom, maybe we should just... Be quiet, she snapped, then immediately softened as she turned back to me. Look, this is clearly a misunderstanding. We can resolve this internally. I nodded slowly. You're right. You can resolve it internally. She relaxed just a little, thinking she found an exit. By leaving, I added. Her eyes widened. Excuse me? You and your son have 5 minutes to vacate the property, I said, checking my watch peacefully. And if we don't? She asked, her voice trembling despite the effort to control it. I shrugged. Then it stops being a conversation. That was the moment it hit her. Not all at once, but enough. This wasn't a neighbor she could find. This wasn't a homeowner she could bully with letters and penalties. This was outside her system, outside her control. She took a step back, then another, like the ground itself had betrayed her. I could call my lawyer, she said weakly. You should, I replied, after you leave. The forest fell quiet again, like it was listening. Even the moving truck's engine suddenly sounded too loud. Her son leaned toward her. Mom, let's go. She hesitated. Pride and fear fought out on her face. Fear won. Fine, she snapped. This isn't over. I smiled just a little. It is. She spun around, barking orders at the movers. Unload nothing. Load everything. Move. Now. The clipboard was left on the hood of the truck, then snatched back up like it was the last scrap of authority she had left. Within minutes, chaos replaced confidence. Boxes went back inside. Doors slammed. Her son climbed into the passenger seat without another word. As the engine roared to life, she leaned out the window, eyes locked on me. You think this makes you untouchable? No, I said. Honestly, it just means you touched the wrong thing. The truck rolled away, tires crunching over the gravel, disappearing down the road the same way it had arrived, except now it felt smaller, quieter, diminished. I stood there for a moment after they were gone, listening as the forest slowly started breathing again. Then I turned, unlocked the cabin, and stepped inside like nothing had happened. But something had happened, and it didn't take long for everyone else to hear about it. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. Not officially, of course. HOAs don't keep meeting minutes that include humiliation. It traveled the way gossip always does, through whispers, side conversations, half-finished sentences over mailboxes and driveways. Did you hear about the time Mrs. Blake tried to give away a cabin? Not just any cabin. A cabin she didn't own. A cabin she couldn't control. And how she'd been forced to back down in front of her own son, her movers, and the very authority she thought she represented. Her reputation didn't just crack. It collapsed. People stopped replying to her emails so quickly. Fines were suddenly questioned. Meetings got quieter when she spoke, then noticeably louder when she finished. Power like hers only works as long as people believe in it. And belief, once broken, doesn't come back easily. As for me, the cabin returned to being exactly what it had always been. Quiet, forgotten, right where it belonged. But every now and then, I'd hear her name mentioned with a tone I hadn't heard before. Not fear, not respect, amusement. And that might have been the most satisfying resolution of all. When everything settled, when the driveway stayed empty again and the forest went back to pretending none of it had ever happened, I kept thinking about how close that situation came to going very differently. Not because I doubted the outcome, but because I know how often people don't push back. That's the part that sticks with me. The truth is, this was never really about a cabin. It was about unchecked authority and how easy it grows when no one challenges it. Mrs. Blake didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal property. In her mind, she was solving a problem. Her son needed a place. She had power. The rules were hers to interpret. End of story. And that mindset is far more common than people like to admit. From a legal perspective, most HOA horror stories don't begin with blatant corruption. They begin with small victories. A fine here, a warning there. Someone backs down, because it's easier than fighting. Someone else pays just to make it go away. Over time, the person enforcing the rules stops seeing boundaries and starts seeing territory. This is a psychological trap, especially for people who tie their identity to authority. When your sense of self is built around being in charge, resistance starts to feel like disrespect. Questions feel like threats. Compliance becomes proof that you're right. That's when power stops being a responsibility and turns into entitlement. And here's the uncomfortable truth. HOAs rely on that dynamic, not because every board is malicious, but because the system assumes most homeowners won't escalate. They won't read the fine print. They won't consult anyone who knows better. They'll sigh, complain to friends, and comply until someone doesn't. According to standard procedure, the moment you push back with knowledge, real knowledge, not just confidence, the entire structure starts to wobble. Authority without jurisdiction is just noise. And once people realize that, everything changes. What happened after wasn't dramatic. No lawsuits, no viral videos, no public apology, just quiet consequences. Mrs. Blake still lived in the neighborhood. She still held her title, but the spell was broken. People ask questions now. They reread emails. They stopped assuming she was right just because she sounded certain. And that's how power actually gets checked. Not through shouting, not through revenge, but through clarity. For me, the cabin stayed the same. Same creaking floors. Same cold mornings. Same silence. But every time I left, I carried something new with me, an awareness that most conflicts like this only escalate because one side assumes the other will fold. So if you're watching this and you've ever dealt with someone like Mrs. Blake, an HOA president, a manager, a board member, anyone who treats rules like weapons, remember this: authority always has limits. Confidence does not equal legality. And intimidation only works if you allow it to. You don't need to be loud to stand your ground. You don't need to threaten anyone. You just need to understand where the lines are drawn and refuse to let someone erase them because it's convenient for them. I'm curious what you would have done in that situation. Would you have laughed it off? Called a lawyer immediately? Paid just to avoid the headache? Or stood there like I did and waited for someone else to realize they'd step way out of bounds? Drop your thoughts in the comments. These stories matter more when we compare notes. Because somewhere right now, someone is opening an HOA envelope and wondering if they really have a choice. And more often than not, they do.